Hello, I'm David Krause, editor of the Aspen Times. Thank you for joining us today. This is part of our series on some of the ballot questions that'll be on the November 6th election. Today we are talking with Roaring Fork Transit Authority Chair George Newman, who will talk about ballot question 7A, which is a proposal by RFTA, the local transit authority, to put a property tax increase, a mill levy, to help fund different parts of the operation. George, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate you spending the time. Wanted to go over a couple of things really quick so everybody kind of understands what we're talking about, and feel free to jump in at this point. The mill levy proposed is 2.65, which for about every $500,000 of actual property value, the tax would generate, or the tax would be about $6.75 a month. On a local, on a residential, about $81 a year. For commercial property with a at about $1 million in property value, that would equal about $64 a month, roughly $770 a year. George, RFTA's never had a property tax funding or anything like that. Why now?
Well, the reason why now is RFTA's revenue is about 50% of RFTA's revenue comes from sales taxes. And another 15% comes from fare bases, another 25% comes from contractual arrangements that we have with the City of Aspen, Aspen Ski Company, and the remaining comes from bonds and grants. So by state statute, transit agencies are only allowed up to 1% for sales taxes. And several of our jurisdictions have already capped at 1%. So we can't ask for an additional sales tax because it would not be equitable across all the jurisdictions. So really the only equitable and viable option for us to look at long-term sustainable funding is for a property tax.
So the question, if you look at the question, there's different parts of it, but it states that this would generate up to $9.5 million annually starting in 2019. We talked earlier, you don't know that we'd get there the first year, but what about after that? What would be the goal after that for funding?
Well, the goal is to utilize that number, about $9 million per year, and that will go to lots of capital and operating expenses. And we could talk about the reason why and how those dollars will actually get utilized. The main use is obviously buses. Mm-hmm. You don't have a transit system without buses, right? And so our buses run on an average for 14 years, and when they reach that time frame, they usually have already accomplished or traveled 500,000 miles, and that's usually the lifetime of a bus. And so we need, over the next 30 years, we need to look at purchasing 228 buses, and that averages about 4 to 28 buses a year. Those buses cost today anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, depending on whether we look at diesel or electric. So that's a huge number in terms of being able to continue to be able to operate on our schedules. We've got to have buses, and so that's the bulk of those dollars.
So you talk about capital, and I know on the question some of it addresses bus stops. But one I think that is interesting for our viewers and for our voters in this area is there's a line in there that says it would help congestion on Highway 82. How would this do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, I came in today, I was a little bit late because now we're on an off-season schedule, and so buses are only running every 30 minutes for the local and the BRT. And so what this will allow us to do is for our local scheduled routes, we'll be looking at year-round, more frequent services on weekends and evenings. And on our very popular BRT route, again, we'll be looking at year-round, evenings, weekend services for the BRT. So rather than half-hour, an hour wait as it gets in the evening, you'll have a bus coming by every 15 minutes like we do in the wintertime. So that's a critical part in terms of addressing the congestion on Highway 82, in terms of our air quality, in terms of moving the workforce up and down the valley. We take off about over 1,000 cars a day in terms of people utilizing buses versus having to rely on their cars to get up and down the valley.
Last year, I looked at some of the RFTA stats last year. 5 million rider trips, 5 million miles driven in a 70-mile range. But you guys also are responsible for roughly 35 miles of the Rio Grande Trail.
Right, so we are also responsible. We own and maintain the very popular Rio Grande Trail. And of course, that's a multi-use trail popular from everywhere from runners and bikers to commuters. And so this property tax will allow us to, on a regular schedule, be able to upgrade and maintain that popular trail, as well as be able to fund the Levy Trail, which is a very important recreational trail from those residents from Glenwood down to Newcastle.
Let's talk about, we mentioned briefly the Gallagher Amendment. We talked earlier with somebody from Colorado Mountain College about balancing against the Gallagher Amendment. When you get involved in a property tax like this, how do you have to project what this will do based off the Gallagher Amendment, and you get involved in that?
Right. Well, we did look at the proposed changes in the Gallagher Amendment, how it's going to be dropping from residential from about 7.2 to down to around 6.1 or 6.2. So our numbers and our projections are based on the anticipated drop of the Gallagher Amendment.
The big two questions that we're asking on these forums as far as the election goes is what happens if this does pass, and then as well what happens if this doesn't pass. So let's tackle first what happens if this does pass.
Right, just as we talked earlier, our ability to provide better service, more frequent service, better pedestrian and infrastructure upgrades, the better ability to maintain and improve our Rio Grande Trail. Those are all aspects, and obviously, and most importantly, the ability to replace and purchase buses to maintain our normal schedule. Those are all the critical reasons why we need to have this tax passed. On the other side, what happens if it doesn't pass? We can just delete all of these projects off the list. And in fact, we'll probably be looking at a 20% reduction in terms of our service. And so where we're looking at an off-season schedule today, that may become the reality for a year-round schedule. Those dollars will be needed to be able to purchase the buses, and so to compensate for that, we would have to lower our frequency of service. We would have to not have improvements in terms of our infrastructure or safety, pedestrian crossings. We would not be able to maintain the Rio Grande Trail in a timely fashion. And so how will that affect our environment? How will that affect our economy? How will that affect our congestion? It would be all negative. You know, 66% of our workforce into Pitkin County comes from outside the county. We import about 66% of our workforce. And so as the Mid-Valley continues to grow and if our service declines, it will be harder and harder, I believe, for our business owners to be able to retain and recruit qualified workers.
George, what else do people need to know about this proposal, 7A?
Well, I think, again, Aspen and Pitkin County, I believe, are really the primary beneficiaries for RFTA service over the many years. Again, as I said, 66% of our workforce comes in from outside the county. It allows the opportunity for our guests and tourists to enjoy all the amenities we have, whether it's the skier shuttles in the wintertime, the Maroon Bell shuttle in the summertime, able to access all of our special events, the X Games, Jazz Aspen. Those are great amenities that we are used to, and our success as a resort and community are directly tied to the success of RFTA and its ability to continue not only to maintain its current level of service, but to be able to expand to meet the growing needs. So I would just encourage everyone to become informed and educated on 7A. We have a website set up, www.onboardwithrafta.org. The ballots are already going out. Please be informed. Please vote. Please support RFTA and 7A.
George, I appreciate you spending the time up here today. As he said, ballots have started to go out. They will be mailed out the week of October 15th. Election day is November 6th. If you need a copy of the sample ballot, it can be found at the Pitkin County website as well. and we will continue to be following this story as Election Day comes up. Again, my name is David Krause. I'm the editor of the Aspen Times. I've been joined by George Newman, who is the chairman of the RFTA board, to discuss ballot question 7A. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, David.